What manner of man is this former revolutionary? What works within the mind of a man who in April 1959 said,
I am not communism. I am not agree with communism.
And just 2 years later insisted, I am a Marxist-Leninist and will be until the last day of my life. What kind of conscience does this man own? A man who once told the Cuban peasants, the man who works the land must own it. Those who have no land must have some. And then 3 years later told these same people, why should we give land to the peasant? Soon he'd want more and more, and then he'd become a large landowner. A man of many faces. Surely these are questions which will intrigue the historian and the analyst for years to come. Aristides Molian again.
At this moment, now, not as quickly as some, but not as slowly as others, we have realized that Castro is not following the right path. He had not called for elections in Cuba. He rather consulted the people in the open plaza in order to support or reject his policies, and to reject his policies naturally implied a certain number of risks. We of Latin America have long experience with dictatorships, and we know full well that when the people is consulted in the open plaza, it is because there is a dictatorship. And we know also that a dictatorship always brings about the jailing of the better groups, the suppression of public freedoms. From that moment on, we could no longer support the Castro regime.
In October 1962, the world was not only disillusioned with the Cuban Revolution, but outraged with the discovery of at least 10 Soviet missile bases in Cuba. Aerial reconnaissance photos revealed their location and their menace. Armed with 1 megaton warheads, the missiles could reach and conceivably destroy Washington or Lima, Peru.
Now your leaders are no longer Cuban leaders, inspired by Cuban ideals. They are puppets and agents of an international conspiracy which has turned Cuba against your friends and neighbors in the Americas and turned it into the first Latin American country to become a target for nuclear war. We know that your lives and land are being used as pawns by those who deny your freedom.
The President of the United States announced the nation's intentions. Among the decisions, an insistence upon immediate dismantling and withdrawal of the missiles, a quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba, and continued increased surveillance of the military buildup. Hemisphere support was swift. The Organization of American States, by a vote of 20-0, approved the resolution, some nations offering active military assistance. Surveillance did continue. In the air, as planes made passes to photograph missile installations despite Cuban anti-aircraft. And on the sea, as U.S. Navy Task Force 136 steamed to a fateful rendezvous with Russian ships, all Cuba-bound ships entering the quarantine area would be commanded to heave to be searched. 1 week later, Premier Khrushchev, who had never once consulted Castro, issued a new order calling for the return of the weapons to Russia. Then, like a penitent burglar who's been caught in the act, he wrote to President Kennedy, after all, both you and I understand what kind of weapons they are. Editorial cartoonists around the world expressed their scorn. But even though the missiles left, and even though the world allowed itself its first sigh of relief in days, the fact is this: 6 million Cubans remain imprisoned on their island, and more than 250,000 are without a country. Each vowed that their displacement was only temporary, that they'd return to create a free Cuba.
The news arriving from Cuba is very encouraging to us. The workers have not gone over to communism. The peasants have not gone over to communism. The students have not gone over to communism. The regime exists today because of two reasons. Because of the apparatus of betrayal and espionage, and because of the military apparatus set up and handled by the Muscovites.
The world awaits the next act of history. With millions of people in Cuba and throughout the world directly affected by the next turn of Castro's ambition, the world now awaits with anxiety and with contempt. This is their verdict. The Deputy Prime Minister of Thailand, Prince Juan.
The subversive attempt to bring Cuba under communism has been done tortuously in the manner of a snake. It is only right that the United States has taken out the snake's fangs. But, as Shakespeare said, the snake is scotched, but not killed. Castro is more dangerous than a snake.
We see that revolution in Cuba is rather moving in opposite direction.
If later it joined the communist bloc, it turned matters worse. But even had it not done so, from that moment on, it had no longer our support. Tamargo, Cuban correspondent. Without any doubt, at the end of 4 years, Fidel Castro, having delivered his revolution to Russia, has converted the republic into this concentration camp, as everyone who is in Cuba can see.
And it's a kind of depressing factor to me, because we in our country too believe in democratic principles.
Dorrego, from Buenos Aires. I deplore that 6 million Cubans have been swindled by a revolution which promised them freedom and democracy and gave them death and slavery. Silva, from Rio de Janeiro. We also regret that Cuban workers have not been granted their rights, and we regret that there is no freedom of press in that country. We believe that freedom of press is fundamental, as we consider the press to be the lung through which we breathe. A Mandarin from Hong Kong. The Cuban Revolution was at first a local political revolution, but later it was utilized as a total one by the communists in their attack against the free world. Whether in Asia or Africa, the communists have been taking advantages of contradictions within a country to stir up trouble to further their aggressive designs. A Cantonese refugee from communist China. For the purpose of seizing power, the communist revolutionaries found it to their advantage to be on the side of the people at the beginning. But once victory was secured, they did not hesitate to turn their guns on the people. From our own bitter experience, people on the Chinese mainland have come to realize that the fate in store for the Cubans cannot be any different from what has befallen the Chinese people. A Cuban correspondent. This is a living example which should be studied carefully by all Latin American countries because of the lesson which can be derived from it.
100 years ago, the great Cuban liberator, Jose Marti, wrote, "Among the dreams of man, there is one that is most beautiful, to overcome the darkness. Perhaps one day, Cuba will overcome the darkness and truly know freedom and peace."